This video covers the basic technique of 2D needle felting. There are other videos available to you covering aspects that I hope you'll find interesting and will add to your skills. Your kit will include small felt offcuts for sampling. At every stage of your design, sampling is incredibly useful. It just takes a few minutes to try something out on a small piece before committing it on your cover. Before you start, let's look at how the tool fits together and works. Put the hook end of the 3 needles into the plug with the holes in, facing towards the fatter end of the plug. When you match the 2 halves of the plugs together, insert them into the handle and push down firmly. By reversing the needles, you can store them in the handle. These needles are very sharp. They're barbed to 2 centimeters down the shank. The action of the barbs causes the wool fibers to tangle and mat together. So needling should be firm and up near to the 2 centimeter mark. Be careful not to bend the needles in any way, as they will break. If you do break one, make sure you find the broken end to dispose of safely. Always use the pad under the area you're working on. Because of the tangling of the coloured wool into the felt, you regularly need to pull your work off the pad to stop it fusing together. Now let's look at the wool fibres. They're quite long, so keep a distance between your hands to allow for the length. Then it's easy to pull off a tuft. From a tuft of wool, you can peel off smaller tufts to create a pattern or use to make any shape you like. The old adage, less is more, is definitely a good strategy when handling wool and needle felting. I recommend exploring different ways of pulling out the wool and experimenting with close colour combinations. This is particularly useful if you're planning on using natural forms such as leaves and berries. Pulling a long, thin strip like this effectively gives you a drawing line, which is useful for outlining a shape, perhaps.
Crunchy bits to try and...
So you're really pulling the thread apart?
Yes, yeah.
In this sample, my student Gaynor discovered the value of fragmenting a yarn and some wool tops, laying out her palette before arranging it on her cover.
I love the way you've used so many different colours.
Well, I realised that, they're a little pale bit of purple, a little pale bit of blue, and then a tiny bit of red. So it's sort of a generic lichen, mossy scrub colours that you see in the moor at any time, really. But also the colours are too intense, and when you pull them apart, you just get this sort of gesture.
Yeah.
Through sampling, Gaynor discovered the pleasure of refining her idea, inspired by a humble piece of moorland lichen. She deconstructed a woolen yarn that she added to her colour mix of wool tops, and with increasing minimalism, achieved the delicacy of the lichen that she wanted.
It's sort of there and almost not there, really.
Yeah.
That's what I quite like, the idea of, the sort of smoke and mirrors idea. That we're all temporary anyway, so...
I love the idea that from something so small she's managed to express herself and the place she lives in. From a strip of wool like this, keep stripping it down for very fine lines, and notice how I keep the needles parallel to the fibres for this fine line, whereas for a wider line I keep the needles at right angles. Also notice that lines can shrink, especially when you're forming a circle or a loop, and this is because you're pushing the drawing fibres into the felt, so the undulations are taking up more of the length. I encourage you to get sampling, explore the shapes you can make and the effects of blending colours. The only rule with needle felting here is that fibres must bed down into the felt and become well integrated as part of the fabric. So how much needling should you do? I like to needle thoroughly to ensure maximum integration of the fibres I'm applying, and that they're not just sitting loosely on the surface. There's nothing more disappointing years down the line than seeing loose fibres trapping dust and looking shaggy. So I run my fingers over the surface to gauge movement and just keep felting until they feel secure. Check the back. You want to see those fibres coming through. There's still a bit more to do on this one. But now I've spent a few more minutes needling those fibres through, so you can really get a sense of the integration of the fibres. My clients usually have a list of plants, animals or birds they want to include and the colours they favour. I'll sketch out a very rough plan on my iPad. Sometimes I'll gather a few materials from outside for inspiration. Sometimes I use picture books or even the internet for specific images. This student brought an image on her phone. An easy way to make a start is with actual strips or tufts of wool, which you map out on your cover just to see how it looks. So if you end up with fried eggs instead of flowers, it's easily remedied. What I like about this approach is that you can be bold and experimental and keep changing things until you're happy. Remember, this is rough, so when you start needling, your design gradually takes on refinement. The rest of this tutorial is speeded up to give you a sense of progression. I hope you found this session useful, and I encourage you to watch more of the other tutorials available to you. Happy felting!